Hi, I'm Ethan. I love muzzleloading. Today we're talking with collector, historian, and author Jeff Jaeger about his history in muzzleloading, his passion for history, Indiana history here specifically, then also what it took and kind of the process behind the publishing of multiple of Jeff's books that he's worked on and his own book, Indiana Gunmakers. This is going to be a really interesting episode, I think, if you're just interested in history and then some of the research and the documentation that goes into finding out kind of almost lost information and bringing it to the public eye like Jeff has. We're going to go through quite a few different eras here, but it's really, I think, going to be a good episode. I hope you enjoy it. Jeff, I'd like to thank you for talking with us here today. Could you let us know and kind of get us started by talking a little bit about how you got your start in muzzleloading?
Well, sure. I think that the best place for me to start is really with my childhood, because I think my childhood had a pretty profound effect on where I am today as far as my hobby and my passion of history and collecting goes. So I grew up in northeast Wisconsin, kind of in the sticks, a small farming community called Reedsville. We had 750 people in our community. We were surrounded by farmers where I grew up. We lived 3 miles outside of town and on the edge of a woods, and I was pretty secluded from the collecting world. You know, long rifles, we didn't see them in Wisconsin in my childhood. What did have an impact on me was the TV show. And I know that you hear this often because I hear it on your podcast that Fess Parker and Daniel Boone played a very important role in a lot of people's lives. And my life was no exception. So that TV series where Fess Parker portrayed Daniel Boone was a favorite after-school TV program. And that ran for about 7 years or so, from about 64 to about 1970.
Okay. And when would you have started watching that? How old and what grade, I guess, would that have been for you?
I probably would have started watching it probably shortly after it started. So I was born in 60, and that series started in 64.
Okay.
And so I probably, I can't pinpoint the exact year, but I probably started watching it when it started.
Wow.
And I really got intrigued with our American history at the time. That really stuck with me. And even to this day, I think about that television program with Fess Parker and Patricia Blair, and Ed Ames was there. And I learned about the opening of Kentucky. And I learned, that Daniel Boone carried that long rifle, that flintlock rifle with him wherever he went. And I was intrigued by the rifle then, but I never saw them where I grew up. I didn't know they existed at that point, and even growing up into my teens. And I was hunting with shotgun pretty regularly, but I didn't know those old rifles still existed.
Even with the Bicentennial coming around there, was it just not very active in Wisconsin for that time?
It wasn't exposed to me.
Okay.
I didn't get exposed to it. And look, I spent a lot of my time outdoors. And even as a youngster, I was out hunting. It was hunting starting out with a pellet gun and then a .22, and somewhere around the age of 12 or 13, I got my first shotgun, a little single shot 20 gauge, and then graduated to a Remington 870 Wingmaster, and I wore that thing out, hunting ducks and pheasant and even squirrel and rabbit. We did it a lot.
Yeah.
And people in northeast Wisconsin, I mean, my peers hunted. That's what we did. And if we weren't hunting, we were involved in football. Of course, the Green Bay Packers were big back then. And so they were always in the news, and we played football if we weren't hunting. That was kind of my childhood. And look, my dad wasn't a hunter at all, but my older brother was. And my brother kind of taught me how to hunt, and his older friends taught me how to hunt. I fell in love with the outdoors, but it was modern stuff.
Right.
It wasn't the old muzzleloader by any means.
But you were still participating in very similar activities, wouldn't you say, that of you know, the frontiersmen that you were looking up to at the time, even if it was the Fess Parker interpretation of it. You were still out there hunting just like him.
Exactly. So when I was out there hunting, we were on the edge of the woods, and when I'd go into the woods, I was Daniel Boone, you know, at those young ages.
Yeah.
And there's no doubt about it. He was in the back of my mind. Yeah. So that TV show and the place I grew up, and my ability to go out hunting, whether it would be with friends or alone, I was on the frontier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just had that feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. In my mind, I was in the frontier.
Yeah. What do you think drew you to that? Is that just the kind of thing that a young boy during that period, that's what they were looking for?
Yeah.
And you were just drawn to that? Or do you think it was partly your older brother going out and doing that stuff? You know, you kind of had two role models to play off of there.
That's right. My older brother had a big impact, and I watched him and his excitement and his passion for hunting, and the friends that he had around him and their passion for hunting. Man, that's just what we did. And again, I don't want to repeat myself too much, but if I wasn't doing that, I was active in sports and primarily in football, even from a young age. I mean, in fourth grade, I was playing organized football.
Wow.
It was flag football.
Right. Yeah.
You know, until I got to high school, then it became tackle football, and my high school was small. So look, they needed every able body out on that field, you know, playing football. And I got to play a lot of football because I went to a small school. So football and hunting was it when I grew up. So
you, as a young boy, grew up hunting, playing sports. You're very active, very outdoors. What happened then, you know, kind of after that, not to call it a phase, but that era of your life, and how did that transition into kind of the muzzleloading side of things that we're here to talk about?
When I was, my father was a school teacher, high school teacher. He was one of my high school teachers, and he had the knowledge of how to operate a camera. And his camera was an old viewfinder camera that the press used to use to take press pictures. It was called a graphics camera. And it used 4 by 5 inch sheets of film or negatives. Mm-hmm. And it was all black and white. And my father was the only one in the school and in the village that knew how to take pictures. And he taught me how to take pictures with it. And our high school had a dark room. And so I had an interest in it, and I had an interest in developing film. And my father taught me how to use the darkroom, and that stayed with me through college. I took a photography course. I minored in communication, and I learned to appreciate the visual arts in that time period. So I'm still not into muzzleloading. Okay, even through high school, I'm not into muzzleloading yet. And I went to college, and I took a photography class in college, and still not into muzzleloading. I still didn't know these guns existed.
Wow.
Into college. And after college, when I went to college, I lost my hunting ground. So hunting almost stopped for me when I went to college. The land was gone.
Yeah.
And so I took a job, and I focused really on my career. I became a salesman for a large chemical company in Wisconsin, and they transferred me to Illinois. Still not okay. So now I'm 2 or 3 years out of college, and I still have not been exposed to muzzleloading yet. And then I came to Indiana in 1988, and that move with another company really changed my life. And this is where I started a a serious interest in history, especially Indiana history.
Yeah.
And I bought a house near Lafayette, which was only about 3 miles from the battleground where the Battle of Tippecanoe was fought.
Yeah.
And I learned about William Henry Harrison, and I learned about Tecumseh. And I became really, really intrigued with that. And then I started to learn about Vincennes and the history associated with the town of Vincennes in southwest Indiana. And shortly after that, my wife and I had just gotten married, and my wife and I took a trip to Asheville, North Carolina. This is pre-kids now.
Yeah.
And we spent time in an antique shop there, and that's where I saw my first antique rifle, my first muzzleloading rifle.
Wow.
On the wall of this antique shop. And look, something snapped inside of me. It was like I picked that thing up, and this was the gun that Daniel Boone carried. I mean, it was like the gun. I knew it wasn't the same gun, but it was like the gun, and it was long, and it was curly maple, and the architecture was beautiful, and the craftsmanship was just something to behold. And look, I spent the next day in the library across the street of Asheville, North Carolina, on vacation, and I began reading about the Kentucky rifle, or the American Longrifle. Wow. And the history associated with it. But that shop owner told me, he saw it in me. He saw I was really intrigued with this rifle, and he said, "Jeff, there's a whole collector's market out there. I mean, this is a collecting segment in and of itself, these American long rifles." And I was kind of flabbergasted. And because here I am, I was maybe, by this time I'm about 33 years old, and I hadn't been exposed to it. So I came back to Indiana and started making phone calls and finding out more about the collector world, and searched out anybody that would help me, anybody who could help me or give me a lead. Where can I find these guns? Where can I see them? Where can I learn about them? And then I started finding books and learning about books, and I started a small collection of books on the subject. And one of those books was by a guy named Albert Lindert. And Albert Lindert in the 60s had written a book on Indiana gun makers. Now, it was a small book, and Albert Lindert did an excellent job for the time. He didn't have fax machines. He didn't have the internet.
Right.
He didn't have cell phones. He didn't have digital cameras to share information back and forth. He didn't have any of that. He did everything longhand and by telephone and by visiting history sites in Indiana and historical associations in Indiana, collecting his information. And he assembled a book, and that was the book that really launched me into collecting Indiana rifles and studying Indiana gun makers.
Okay.
So here I am. I'm in my early 30s before I even knew of muzzleloading. And I'm not the typical collector, because most collectors that collect what I collect, or muzzleloading rifles or Kentucky rifles, they've seen these rifles from childhood on. Mm-hmm. So I continued my search for people that could help, or associations that could help. And there was a guy named Kurt Johnson over in Illinois. He was writing a book on Illinois gun makers at the time.
Yeah. And
I met Kurt at his gun show in Princeton, Illinois. That was probably about 95 or so. He said to me, "Jeff, Indiana needs a lot of research and a lot of help on Indiana gun makers. there's a lot out there that are undiscovered. And he challenged me to take up the book project. And it was then about 1995 that I did, and made it my goal to complete a book on Indiana gun makers. And that's how I got started.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
That's incredible. I want to go back to Asheville here for just a second.
Sure.
You go into this antique shop and there's a flintlock rifle. Was that the first time that you had seen one since you were watching Daniel Boone? Was this like an intersection of childhood Jeff Jaeger and adult Jeff Jaeger?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I had never picked one up before. I'd never held one. I'd never seen one. I didn't know they existed. Wow. I really didn't know they existed. Even modern muzzle loading. Okay, so where I grew up, where the deer hunting was, they use modern shotgun, and I don't know any of my peers that used a muzzle loader.
Interesting, because you were, I mean, I suppose you could have just missed it, but that was right around when the Thompson center Hawkens and things really started to shape, contemporary muzzle loading. That's just fascinating to me.
That I missed it.
Yeah.
Yeah. My childhood was pretty, I was pretty secluded there in Northeast Wisconsin. Yeah. But no doubt about it.
You were secluded, but you still held on to it and came back to it when you saw that rifle. I mean, when you were telling that story, it gave me goosebumps. You can believe me or not, but that was just like, wow. That's just so cool to travel so far to connect with that and to connect with it. I mean, we hear about so often that people have watched the show or hunted as kids and then they just kind of left and got out of it. But to hear that you went so long and were able to get into it and come into it with such a passion is just incredible.
Yeah, there was something inside of me. There was something, I mean, that, and I believe that there was this passion inside of me. It just wasn't realized.
Yes.
It was there. I just didn't realize it.
Yeah. I call that the call is the term that I've come up for it. I think that there's something in us, especially as Americans, that we're drawn to that era and to that history. And I think that moment for you in that antique shop, you could not ignore that call anymore.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. There's no doubt. Once that was over and I came back to Indiana, it was inside of me and it was exposed and it just never stopped. It never stopped from the early mid 1990s until now. So I mean, and it's still going strong.
Right. Yeah. You don't put out the work that you've been putting out without that being strong, for sure. So what was it like coming back to Indiana, which is, especially in the 80s and 90s, kind of a hotbed for muzzleloading with the different associations and different events throughout the state? Was that just like information overload for you, or did it take some time to get up to speed with all of them?
Well, okay. So I would say both of those. So there was, when I started looking around me and started asking questions, there was a tremendous source of information here in Indiana from collectors and associations, and the National Muzzleloading Rifle Association was one of those early associations that really embraced what I was doing, and they, or I should say, embraced my questions, and they embraced my hobby, and they allowed me to do things like photograph Indiana guns down there at Friendship. They allowed me to exhibit Indiana rifles.
Yeah.
Okay. So my collection and my knowledge was still in its infancy, but I was able to put together an assortment of 20 or 25 rifles to exhibit at the Rand House there at Friendship. And they gave me a flavor of of what an exhibit is. And they allowed me to take control of the exhibit and do my thing, to be the purveyor of information on the Indiana gun makers and the rifles that were on exhibit. And so all this came about with an association like the NMLRA, but there were also the people that, it was a network of people that had Indiana guns, that knew of Indiana gun makers, that allowed me to take their rifle down to Friendship and put it on exhibit for a week.
Right.
And so there's a lot of people that understood my passion and were willing to help me.
That's wonderful. I love to hear that.
Yeah, that's what it was all about. And so here I am, 20, 25 years later, and I realize that all of this comes about because people have the same interest and people want to promote it. And so they're willing to help. All you got to do is be the catalyst and make it happen. And so associations have played a big role. NMLRA is a big one, and Kentucky Rifle Association, the same thing. You talk to their members, and their members are more than willing to help. They're more than willing to share their knowledge. And if you got something worthy of promoting, they're going to be there with you. So I've seen it time and time again. People played a big role. Friends, and look, I could name them. There's guys like Kurt Johnson I mentioned in Illinois. There's the collector here in northern Indiana, Shelby Galeen, has written a book on Kentucky gun makers. In fact, he's written 3 volumes. And I've had quite a relationship with Shelby over the years because I found a way to help him in his books, and he found a way to help me. And Shelby's an excellent researcher, and he has a knack for using the internet. He has a knack for digging documents out of archives and finding information. And I had a knack for photography, and so I made several trips down to Kentucky with Shelby to photograph rifles for his books. And they're black and white, and some of them are in color in his later volume. But I photographed probably 100 or more rifles from Kentucky for his books. And Shelby's had a big hand in my latest book on Indiana gun makers from the research standpoint. So it's that kind of thing that really makes it work. People helping people. Yeah.
I think that's something that we hear time and time again about muzzleloading is there's a community there that is second to none, really, I think. And each time I hear a story like that, I just kind of notch it up a little bit higher, because it's the kind of thing that you love to hear, that even going back to 1995 with Kurt Johnson, he saw your interest. And I was talking to Kurt this past weekend at the June shoot down at Friendship. And we talked a little bit about your book, and he brought up that he's been egging you on a little bit and pushing you to make this book happen, and about how excited he was to hear that it was doing well.
Oh yeah. Well, this brings up another really interesting point. When you start a project like this and you tell the other people in muzzleloading that you're going to write a book, and they help you with research, they help you find the guns that you need for the book, they're going to now hold you to it. Okay? They're not going to let you get away just taking that information and keeping it for yourself.
I love that.
So they hold you to your statement. And that's one thing that kept me going. When I would go to Kurt's show twice a year over in Illinois, it would always be, Jeff, how's the book coming? how much progress have you made? And that kind of thing makes it come to reality.
Yeah. That kind of that reminder, a little prodding here and there, but it's good prodding, you know, it's that drive. Fascinating.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So when you started thinking about, you know, doing this kind of research and the collecting side of it, how did your skills with, you know, cameras and photography, did that just come in as kind of an ancillary skill that worked really well for the collecting side of things? Or did you find that was a driver for you wanting to photograph these works of art? Because you mentioned that when you were in college, taking that photography course, you learned to understand and appreciate, you know, fine art kind of in that context. So did that come back when you got more into collecting?
Yes. Yes, I would say. And I would probably say that visual art appreciation never really left me. I always had that inside of me from a young age, and then seeing photographs that Kurt Johnson had taken, that the publisher Shumway had taken, and seeing the work that they had done. And then it was at Friendship, in fact, where Shumway showed me and Kurt Johnson showed me how photographs were taken, you know, photographs of guns. So I could use my dad's camera. I learned how to use my dad's camera, but I never took a photograph of a rifle until I went to Friendship.
Ah, okay.
So at Friendship, here's Mr. Shumway and Kurt Johnson. They were working together on Kurt's book, but I would see Shumway photographing, and he showed me how to paint the light for these black and white negatives. And we would use a long exposure of like 30 seconds.
Really?
To expose the negative. And he showed me how to paint the light on the object. And then I knew how to develop the negative when I got home. I set up a dark room in my basement, and then I printed the photographs in my dark room that I put up. It was just a utility room in the basement
right.
that I turned into a dark room.
I love that.
So I started printing. I started printing a lot of pictures and spent a lot of time in the dark room. And that photography portion of it is really my favorite. The visual portion of the Kentucky rifle is right there alongside with the historic significance of the rifle in my mind anyway.
Yeah.
So that's how photography kind of played with me. And you know, along with that, you know, the book that was released here a couple years ago, Indiana Gunmakers, most of the photography is in color, probably 90% of it. Mm-hmm. But what happened is I spent almost 20 years photographing these rifles in black and white. Mm-hmm. And I drove thousands of miles to get these photographs and spent many, many, many hours in the darkroom developing the negatives and printing them. And then what happened is digital cameras came out. They came out and they were expensive.
Yeah.
Okay. And I couldn't afford to buy one right away. But finally in 2015, the prices came down gradually. And in 2015, I bought my first digital camera and decided that I'm going to do this all over again. And we're going to do it in color.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So bottom line is I found those guns again and I photographed them the second time, but this time I did it in digital color. So when digital came out, the first digital cameras weren't very good. The resolution was not very good.
Yeah.
And they were expensive. You know, when they first came out, a simple digital camera was was several $1,000s to purchase. And I couldn't buy that. Not with my income and my family that I was raising. Yeah. Wasn't going to happen. And color printing was extremely expensive. But digital got better, and it got better fast, very, very fast, and it got affordable. And all of a sudden, that $8,000 camera in 2015, I was able to buy for $1,500. So that's when I decided to make the switch. When the camera became affordable and printing a book in color also became affordable, because the printing industry was changing rapidly too.
Yeah, they were trying to keep up.
Yes. Yes. So I did it all a second time. And I'm not complaining about that. I'm just stating the fact that technology passed me up. I was doing this too slowly. I mean, I was doing it. I was raising a family. I was working long hours as a salesman, and I was spending a lot of time at church. And the book was not the highest on my priority, and I wouldn't change that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I love the book. It's one of my favorite books, but all the things that you listed that kept you away from it, I think are very important. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. They got to come first, and they did stay first in my life.
Yes, absolutely.
But eventually, and look, that's why books take a long time. Okay, a book like this takes a long time because there's a ton of research, there's a lot of photography, but it's done, the authors do it in time when their family isn't demanding time from them, or their church isn't demanding time, or their work isn't demanding time. Oftentimes it's on, it's on Sunday afternoon, or it's a Saturday, or it's or vacations are cut short to work on the book.
Right.
And that's why it takes decades to make it happen.
It's a little slice here and there. I mean, I would love to be running through the woods every day with my flintlock, but those few mornings each year that I get out to do that, that's just how it goes. But those moments are still all very special.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I get that 100%.
This podcast is brought to you by Thor Bullets. Thor Bullets are a premium full-bore muzzleloader bullet designed specifically for modern inline rifles. Thor Bullets do not require plastic sabots or belts to be fired, meaning less cleaning for you between shots. The patented copper base creates an airtight seal, giving you greater distance and accuracy. Thor's unique engineering allows the bullets to retain 95% of their weight upon impact, and the controlled expansion ensures large, easy-to-follow blood trails. Thor bullets are currently available in a 50 caliber version that is sized to your specific bore. Thor is also expanding into a new 45 caliber bullet designed for faster 1 in 24 and 1 in 22 twist inline rifles. For more information on these great bullets, visit www.thorbullets.com. We'd like to thank Thor Bullets for their sponsorship of this podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Muzzleloader Magazine, the publication for traditional black powder shooters. Since 1974, Muzzleloader has been the leading magazine devoted to traditional black powder hunting and shooting. Each issue is jam-packed with articles on hunting, shooting, gunsmithing, do-it-yourself projects, living history, American history, book and product reviews, and much, much more. Muzzleloader Magazine is the best traditional muzzleloading magazine, bar none. I'd like to thank Jason at Muzzleloader Magazine for his continued support of I Love Muzzleloading and the I Love Muzzleloading podcast. I don't care what you're into. If you're interested in muzzleloading, this is the kind of magazine I think you need to check out. I've been a fan of Muzzleloader Magazine even before the sponsorship. I've always been impressed with what Jason has been able to put out with Muzzleloader Magazine, and it really means a lot for him to be supporting I Love Muzzleloading and our efforts over here. Thank you, Muzzleloader Magazine, for your support. So that kind of talking about the book, it kind of leads into the next thing I'd like to talk about. It is the book. I'm fascinated that it started with Kurt Johnson in 1995. I had no idea. And I'm all the more fascinated that you photographed everything twice.
Yeah.
So could you talk a little bit about what it took to make that book and have it published? I mean, to jump back a little bit, Kurt Johnson tells you that you need to make a book about Indiana gun makers. What did you do then? You connected with Shelby to do some research and to kind of tag team some of these items, but where did you start when taking on this project?
I had a start, and that start came from Albert Lindert. And so Albert Lindert already had a small book on Indiana gun makers published, but, and here's the but, and here's why I think Kurt Johnson spoke up and said what he did, that there's work needed on Indiana gun makers. So Albert Lindert did a lot of his work by phone and letter, and a lot of the information that he published does not cite his sources. And it doesn't, if he does cite his sources, they're not always primary sources. They're secondary sources, or they're word of mouth. And so I kind of went back and studied the names in Albert Lindert's book and tried to find them. Okay, so I tried to find primary sources that listed these guys as gun makers. And there's a lot of them in that book that I could not find a primary source for information. So I had to back up, and a lot of the names that are printed in Albert Lindert's book in the 60s, I took out of my book because I couldn't prove by a primary source that indeed he lived here in Indiana, or indeed he made guns. So I backed a lot of those names up, but I still had a list of names from Albert Lindert. And the list of names was probably somewhere in the neighborhood. After I deleted some, there's probably a start of about 250 gun makers. So that was what I started with, and I added from there. So now I went to find, how do I search for these guys? And this is where people like Shelby Galeen and Kurt Johnson came in again, because they were writing books and they told me where they find their guys.
Right. Okay.
Right? So now I started searching like they searched, and I found gun makers in the 1850 census of Indiana.
Oh, wow.
Because it was in 1850 that the census started listing occupations. And so I would find these guys in the 1850 census listing. And then Kurt Johnson found a lot of his names also in state gazetteers or business directories, state business directories. It was like yellow pages for the state.
Okay.
That was printed back in the 1800s. And Indiana has, I think there's 5 or 6 years that they printed those business directories from about, this isn't exact, but from about 1850 to 1870s, the business directories existed, and they would list gun makers and silversmiths and furniture makers, plumbers and plasterers and carpenters. Okay, they would list them by occupation in the business directories and the city that they worked. And so I found some of the guys in the business directories. There was other secondary sources, like I would go to historic associations, county historic associations, and I would ask. They would almost always give me leads, and I could go to the courthouse and I could look up names in courthouse documents, mostly in the probate section of a courthouse. And the probate section will have wills and deeds listed. They have those archives. And so I would find guys that would will their gunsmithing tools to their son, or they would have an auction and it would list all the goods that were sold at his auction. And if gunsmithing tools were listed in there, well, there's a good chance that guy was a gun maker.
Right.
Then you do a little bit more research on that particular individual and find out, yeah, indeed, he's a gun maker. So it's archives like that. Now, I had a nice advantage being a salesman. Okay. And so I traveled. I've been to these towns where these gun makers lived, and I've been to many of the courthouses and to the historical associations. That's where I found a lot of the leads and a lot of the entries, and those are what I call primary resources. Then there are things like newspaper ads, and again, a lot of historical associations have newspapers that go back to the 1800s. Or they have city directories. Okay, and again, there in the city directory, they would list people by occupation, and I would pick out a lot of names by city directories. Then there's county histories, and every county in Indiana has a history book, and a lot of gun makers are listed in the county history books. So I would pick names out of there. And then later on came the internet, and the internet became a wonderful tool also. Sites like Find a Grave. If I had an inkling that somebody was a gun maker here in Indiana, I could go to that site, Find a Grave, and see if he was listed, see if he's listed, and see if there's information on him that indicated that he was a gun maker. There was Ancestry.com was a big help. And I could find gun makers on Ancestry.com. Now, these are, the internet Albert Lindert didn't have.
Right. They're new tools for you to take advantage of.
Right. Albert Lindert did a great job for the tools he had, but I was given the fact that I lived right here in Indiana, the fact that I was a salesman and I was traveling, I was going to these towns on a regular basis, and I could now have the internet. And I had a fax machine. And later on, I had a cell phone. And so I had all these tools, and that allowed us to find more and allowed us to dig deeper on the names that Albert Lindert had too. Right. So that's how it came about.
That's fascinating. I love to hear that you were, it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds to me like you were double dipping a little bit when you were in these towns. You were working, and then you were on your lunch break, you were going to the courthouse.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Always on the lunch break.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, look, this is how I look when you're a salesman, at least in my industry. We didn't punch clocks. And so the old adage is that my employer would tell me is, Jeff, you can work any 70 hours a week you want to. That's how flexible we are. Any 70 hours you want to, you can work. And so I chose not to work sometimes during the day, in the middle of the day.
I love that. I love that so much.
and look, my employer never suffered.
Right. Yeah.
Throughout this process, I have a great sales history, and I never stole time from my employer. I really didn't. This time was my time and my family's time, but it was convenient for me to be there and to look these things up in the courthouse.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in 2015, then, to talk a little bit more about the book, just because I love hearing about how stuff like this happens. 2015, the camera that you're looking for becomes affordable.
Yeah.
What was the process like of watching the prices of cameras and weighing that against all of the work for photographing these pieces that you'd already done? I mean, years and years and years of effort.
It didn't happen overnight. I made it sound like it happened overnight. It wasn't just 2015. I saw this happen gradually over years, but it was about 2015 that I made the decision to buy that camera and to redo it all. And the decision really didn't come hard. Quality of the photographs all of a sudden became so much better, exponentially better. It wasn't a difficult decision. And look, it's not like the photography was for naught. The black and white, I didn't throw that away. Oh. Okay, I still have all those negatives. I still have them filed, and they'll last almost forever.
Yeah.
So all the negatives are still here in my archive, and they became a great resource for me. And the other thing about photographing all this time is I was able to get into collections. I was able to handle a lot of Indiana rifles. And when you handle the rifles, you learn. Handling is learning. You learn learn to feel them, to pick them up. How heavy are they? How balanced are they? And you can feel the architecture, and you can see and feel the craftsmanship that go into them, and you can learn about them. And all that time I was photographing, I was learning. And so it wasn't like I was throwing this away. It was a process that helped me along the way. And look, the digital photography is really quite simple. Once you learn the recipe of light that's needed on the gun with your camera in your darkroom, it becomes a lot easier than black and white film that needs to be developed in the darkroom and then needs to be printed in the darkroom. The process goes so much quicker. And now the photographs are just all run through Photoshop on the computer, where I can take out the background, and the background is a stark white or black. It's really, really quick and simple compared to what it used to be.
I think it gives you a very pure look at the rifle in that instance. I think being able to subtract everything else out. I mean, we've all seen pictures of, a really nice gun on somebody's bed, and you can see their toes at the bottom.
Yes.
And it's still wonderful to see that rifle, but being able to go through and adjust those things, it's something that I do all the time, because you can see things, and you can really focus on that piece like it's a painting. You remove all the noise, and you can see it in that frame as the artwork that it is today.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And I'll add this too: the photography equipment. If even in black and white, if I would have gone out and bought everything new, it would have been a lot of money. But everything, like my first black and white camera, I think I think I probably paid $50 for it, and it was 30 years old when I bought it.
Yeah.
And the light that I used was just an incandescent light bulb on the end of a stick with a shade on it. And that's all the equipment I needed. Well, a white screen behind the gun, but that's it. And then when I went digital, I bought used equipment that a retiring photographer wanted to dispose of. I mean, he wanted to get rid of it, and he sold it to me pennies on the dollar.
Wow.
And so that's the only way that I could really afford. It's one way that helped me go digital.
Yeah.
Because the lighting was very inexpensive for me. If I would have bought it new, again, it would have been several $1,000s.
Yeah. That adds up quick these days.
Yeah, it does. Yes, exactly. So that's kind of the photography end of it. And I still do it today. I'm not done by any means. In fact, just this last week, I photographed for an individual that's speaking at the KRA and putting a presentation on out in Pittsburgh, or not Pittsburgh, near Pittsburgh. for the Kentucky Rifle Association. And so the photography really comes in handy.
Yeah. And I think in that way you are giving back the way that that your mentors and the people that helped you
Sure.
get where you're at. You're now in that community offering the value that you can to help others. I love to hear that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, well, I think so too. I mean, that you're exactly right. It's that's really a key point that you said. As you're building this book, people are giving to you constantly. It can't be done without other people's help. And now it becomes more, when I take on a project, it's not what is this project going to do for me, or what am I going to get out of it? It becomes, what can I do to help the organization?
Yeah.
Or what can I do to help muzzleloading in general? Or what can I do to help a budding collector? And so we give our time, and we teach people, and we give it back. And that's kind of how I operate to this day. So
at what point then you're working on the Indiana Gunmakers book, you kind of become known within the community, for going after this mission. At what point, and then how did you get involved with the recognition of the Indiana State Rifle? It would have been, let me think about the dates now. I became affiliated with Jim and Carolyn Dressler in the probably, I'm going to say about 96 or 97, when a collectors association was formed here in Indiana. And that association is called the Indiana Antique Arms Collectors Association. And it was a group of guys, about 25 guys back then, that had interest in collecting antique arms. And it wasn't just muzzleloaders. It was Winchesters, and it was bayonets, and it was powder horns, and it was Revolutionary War, and it was Civil War, and so on. Yeah. It was a diverse bunch of guys, but we would get together maybe a half a dozen times a year. And we started this organization back in I think it was probably 96 or 97 that happened. And Jim Dressler was one of those guys. Jim was a very unique individual in that he was so giving of his knowledge and his time. And he built a museum there next to his business in Bargersville, Indiana, which is just 20 miles south of Indianapolis. Jim Dressler, I don't want to say discovered, maybe that's the wrong word, but he started collecting John Small rifles. And he was able to buy 2 rifles and a pistol, a tomahawk, and a powder horn that was attributed to John Small. And Jim was really, really intrigued with this Golden Age gunmaker from Vincennes. Yeah. And started collecting history and photographs of his work. And Jim wanted a book on John Small. He had a few years earlier published a book on powder horns, and hired a photographer to put this beautiful book out there on engraved powder horns. And now he wanted a book on John Small. And he knew I had an interest in Indiana gunmakers, and he knew I knew how to operate a camera because I had photographed his John Small guns for my book. Yeah. And he and Carolyn came to me one day and just put out this offer. Jeff, I want to do a book. Will you help me? And I said, yeah, I will. I was writing another book, but Jim wanted to do a book on John Small. Well, John Small was an Indiana gunmaker, so it wasn't completely foreign to what I was doing. Right. There was some benefit to you too to be involved. Absolutely. And so I took on the project,
And I told Jim and Carolyn that, look, I didn't know what writing a book entailed at the time.
Yeah.
All right. So I told them I could get it done probably in 2.5 years. Well, it took 5 years to get it done. And partially it was because of my work.
Right.
But whatever. It took about 5 years to accomplish it. But that was my first foray into the book world. Was with the help of Jim and Carolyn Dressler, and we did a book on John Small, and I was really thrilled to be involved. And like you said, I learned a lot about Indiana gunmakers while I was researching John Small. And so I went down to, made trips down to Vincennes to the library, and I met a guy named Richard Day. And Richard Day is Mr. Vincennes as far as I'm concerned. he had written a book called The Pictorial History of Vincennes. And he was the guy. He was the go-to guy when it came to Indiana gun makers around Vincennes. And so I remember going down to Richard Day it would have been like March. And there was a light snow on the ground, and Richard's office was in the second floor. It was like a loft of a log building there in Vincennes. It was a historic building on one of the historic sites, and his office was in the loft. And it was freezing cold in there, and there Richard Day was in his winter jacket working at his desk. and I almost chuckled. When I first met him, but he was totally serious, and that's just how he worked. And I told him why I was down there, and I had photographs of John Small rifles from Jim Dressler's collection with me. And I showed them to Richard Day, and Richard Day hadn't seen that before. And he was really intrigued with the photographs, and that there was a collector out there that owned a John Small rifle or rifles.
Yeah.
And so I shared the pictures with him, and he opened up his files to me.
Wow.
And he shared with me Knox County history like you wouldn't believe. And I again, it was a great instance of I'll help you if you help me.
Yeah.
Type of thing. And Richard Day helped with the book, and Jim Dressler included his name on the back of the book, and Richard Day wrote the foreword for the book, which is called John Small of Vincennes, Gunsmith on the Western Frontier. So that was my foray into John Small. So that book was completed, and then Grousland contacted me shortly thereafter.
Okay.
And so now Grousland is the home of former U.S. President William Henry Harrison, and that brick home is located on the east bank of the Wabash River in Vincennes. And that home was completed in 1804 in Indiana Territory. And that's where William Henry Harrison lived for a number of years. But Grousland, a few years earlier, had purchased a John Small rifle at auction, and they brought it home to Vincennes. And they displayed it in the home of William Henry Harrison. So Grousland asked me to come down and speak at their annual banquet and speak about John Small and speak about the book. Well, shortly after that, there was a state senator that had the Vincennes region.
Okay.
And his name was John Waterman. And John still lives down there. He's retired now, but he still lives down there. John Waterman was a state senator, and he got the idea because he was involved in state legislation, and he had been watching what was happening in Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania had attempted to make the Pennsylvania long rifle their state rifle. But Pennsylvania's legislation didn't pass. And John Waterman got the idea from Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And he had the idea of making this John Small rifle the Indiana state rifle. And he became the architect along with an attorney here in Indianapolis who knew Grouseland and also had political ties in Indianapolis.
Okay.
And I forget his name. I think it's Mark Palmer. But they hatched the idea, and John Waterman wrote the legislation in 2012, and Mitch Daniels signed it into law that this John Small rifle would become the official rifle of the state of Indiana. And Indiana became the first in the nation to have a state rifle. Now, there's a footnote to that. We weren't the first to have a state firearm.
Okay.
Both Utah and Arizona had pistols. The Colt Peacemaker and the Model 1911. But Indiana got the first rifle. So, and it's a Kentucky rifle at that.
Right. I mean, it's kind of the best, you know.
No doubt. Yeah, no doubt. So that's how I was involved. The book was used by John Waterman as a visual selling tool to his peers in the state Senate.
Oh, okay.
And he carried that book with him in his briefcase or had it on his desk for a long time.
Wow.
And I know that because I emailed him, and I got an email back from his assistant telling me so. So that was my contribution. I don't take credit for the state rifle. I was happy to provide the visual for it.
Right. I mean, that's got to feel good that book, I mean, especially maybe as a salesman, was used to sell this idea to the legislature and to make this, I mean, historically significant thing pass to recognize this history.
It's a feel good thing. There's no doubt about it. I was elated when I got the phone call telling me what had happened. And look, all this while that legislation was in progress, I knew nothing about it. Okay. I didn't know anything about it until I got the phone call.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and look, I might be jumping ahead here a little bit, but it was that invitation to Grouseland that began the relationship that is now leading to more opportunities with Grouseland.
Absolutely. Let's talk about that. That's where I was headed. So you're right where I'm at, man.
Okay, good deal. So I'm going to back up just a little bit here. There's another gentleman that you know very well named Mel Hankla that's very involved in Americana and history and promoting the long rifle. And Mel is from Kentucky and is very involved with collectors associations, particularly in this case, the Contemporary Long Rifle Association and the Kentucky Rifle Association. Mm-hmm. And Mel was chosen this year or asked to set up an exhibit at the NRA convention that was held in Indianapolis earlier this spring.
Mm-hmm.
And so Mel's idea of the exhibit was to promote arms and affiliated accoutrements, affiliated artifacts from the War of 1812. In particular, 3 battles: the Battle of Tippecanoe, the Battle of Thames, and then there was the one in Ohio also, the Fort Meigs, the siege of Fort Meigs. And so Mel promoted those 3 battles in the exhibit. And he had a significant collection already to display at the exhibit, but he had an idea. And he called me and said, "Jeff, you have a relationship with Grouseland. Is that right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Jeff, what do you think would happen if I asked Grouseland to loan us some of their artifacts for the exhibit, some of the William Henry Harrison artifacts for the exhibit at the NRA convention?" And I thought, Mel, I thought it's a great idea, and I think we ought to ask them. And so I called Grouseland and I spoke with the director. Lisa Ice Jones is the director of Grouseland, and I ran it by her verbally, and she agreed to have a meeting. And Mel and I went and met her at Grouseland, and we met right there in the room where William Henry Harrison would receive Indian chiefs, and William Henry Harrison would receive his political associates and his friends right there in the big receiving parlor. And the 3 of us met there right alongside the fireplace, and Mel laid out his plan. And Lisa Ice Jones thought, man, this is a great opportunity. And, she knows how big the NRA convention is.
Yeah.
And how many people would see the artifacts that otherwise wouldn't. And she agreed to loan, listen to this, William Henry Harrison's original oil painting. Okay. That hangs in Grouseland. She brought it to Indianapolis. William Henry Harrison's hat that he wore into battle, William Henry Harrison's silver spurs, his sword, and the battle banner that he carried into one or more of those battles. The banner that said, "Strike for your country's good." And it's an amazing collection that they have there at Grouseland of William Henry Harrison's artifacts. And she gave Mel everything he asked for, and brought it to Indianapolis.
Wow!
And it was a superb exhibit. The NRA gives out awards for their exhibitors, and Mel's exhibit took 5 awards.
Wow!
From the NRA.
That's incredible.
Two of those awards went to Grouseland, by the way.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So it was really neat to be involved with it. Absolutely. So I guess this all goes to relationships, and it goes to people. And Lisa Ice Jones did a great job, and we're really grateful for what she's done. Yeah, and Grouseland too. It took the Grouseland board of directors to say yes to this. Right.
So how does that lead into then the historically significant display of Indiana history that's coming later this year?
Yes, thank you for that prompt. So While Mel and I are in this meeting, it's coming to an end, and Lisa Ice Jones is agreeing to this, at least agreeing to take the next step. I made a comment. So Grouseland just underwent a $1.5 million restoration of that mansion.
Wow.
And so let me just describe the mansion, if you will. The walls of that mansion are 4 bricks thick. It's built on a limestone foundation, and it's 2.5 stories tall. And it's got the architecture of Philadelphia there on the Wabash River. It was built like a fortress to withstand sieges, to withstand attacks.
Yeah.
And protect William Henry Harrison's family in case the Indians did attack. There are portholes in the basement to shoot from if needed. So anyway, this Grouseland just underwent a nice, and it's beautiful. The architecture and the furniture inside is period furniture, and the home is looking just fabulous right now.
Wow.
And I made the comment to her while we're in the meeting. I made the comment to her how great it looks. And I had been there before a couple of times, and it was really, it's really outstanding right now. But I said, man, this room would be a great room for a rifle exhibit. and Lisa's eyes just opened up, and she said, yeah, tell me more. And so I said, look, the Kentucky Rifle Association owns glass cases, and they loan them out. They loan them out to museums to display Kentucky long rifles or Pennsylvania long rifles or American long rifles. And I said, I'll give them a call and see if they're interested in doing that. And she said, okay, I'm interested. And so I made a call to Randall Pierce of the Kentucky Rifle Foundation, and it didn't take long for Randall to reply to me and say, yes, by all means, we're going there. And so the Kentucky Rifle Association, their foundation, is going to loan us. They're going to deliver the glass cases, set them up, let them there for 3 months, and then take them back.
Wow.
Now, inside those glass cases that are in William Henry Harrison's receiving room, there will be 20 hand-selected long rifles that are made by Indiana gun makers. And these are rifles that I've photographed them, and I'm going to pick ones that are either very artistic or historically significant, or have distinct regional architecture from the east or from the south.
Ah, okay.
And it will be a diverse flavor of Indiana rifles inside of William Henry Harrison's home. Now, this is really significant because this will be the first time an exhibit of this type will occur inside the home of a former U.S. president. And to me, this speaks loudly to our Second Amendment. And this is making now Grouseland won't say this, but I'll say it. And I think it's a political statement that bolsters our history and bolsters our Second Amendment, because it's in the home of a former U.S. president. And not just any president, but William Henry Harrison was significant in our history. William Henry Harrison has a fascinating contribution to United States history. He wasn't president very long.
Yeah, and that's what he's
Not
remembered for, I imagine, for most people.
Yeah, so he wasn't in office very long, and he passed away. But the contributions that he made to this country leading up to his presidency are really quite astounding if you think about it. I mean, he was with Anthony Wayne at Fallen Timbers.
Yeah.
And then he had a short military career before he was chosen to be secretary of the Northwest Territory. And then he was appointed governor of Indiana Territory, which encompassed Indiana and Illinois and Wisconsin and part of Michigan and Minnesota also. It was a big territory. And Indiana didn't even exist when he came here. It didn't exist as a state. He came here in 1800 and finished that home in 1804. And Indiana didn't become a state until 1816.
Right.
Yeah. So now these rifles from Indiana are, they're really a salute to William Henry Harrison for opening up the United States as he did. And he signed those treaties right there at Grouseland or near Grouseland with Indian chiefs that ceded land to the United States, all of Illinois, and a big chunk of southern Indiana as well. And ultimately, William Henry Harrison went on to lead the United States Army, which defeated Tecumseh's Confederacy,
right,
in the War of 1812.
Huh.
So, huge contribution by this guy.
Yeah.
Especially for the Midwest.
Absolutely, yeah. You don't really see a whole lot of historic figures, perhaps you could say, out of the Midwest. But I think, at least in my own experience, in history class or something in schools, his existence is boiled down to one of the shortest terms ever as a president. But when you understand his legacy, it makes a lot of sense that he became the president.
Yes.
Because of how the actions that he took and the significance that he had for the country in a post, War for Independence era. He was one of those figures taking a young country forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the rifles will go into Grouseland and the exhibit will be opened on September 1st. And it will open up after Grouseland's annual meeting, which is held right there on the grounds of Grouseland. But that evening will be the first night of the exhibit, and anybody can buy tickets. And all you need to do is contact Grouseland and reserve them. So that's that Friday night. And then the rifles will stay there for 3 months. And if you go into Grouseland, you'll be able to see the rifle exhibit. There's a fee for getting into Grouseland, but there's no extra fee for seeing the rifles. They're there. And anybody who goes there will be able to see them from a 360-degree viewpoint.
Oh, wonderful.
You'll be able to see, both sides of the rifle. In glass cases, they're well lit. So you'll be able to see quite a history of long rifles right there at Grouseland in a very historic setting. I think I'm a little bit biased, but I think it'll be the finest collection of Indiana rifles ever assembled.
Wow.
Again, I'm a little biased,
right?
But,
I know. I'm excited about it. Since you started to send me some things about this project in its infancy, trying to bring it all together, I'm so excited to see something like this happen, and I really hope that this story can, and perhaps inspire some other folks in other states, very similar to a manner that you were inspired. In the 90s there, to get going on this kind of this kind of work, I hope that we see more of this happen. I think bringing this history to people is so important, and that's something I loved about visiting the display at the NRA show. And even though we wanted to film it with Mel, you can see in the video how busy the display was. And that was fairly early on Friday or Saturday morning. So it wasn't even peak hours for the show. And it was hard to film the display because there were so many people. And I think that's wonderful.
We had a great crowd. And we had a lot of interest. There's no doubt. Mel did a great job with that exhibit. And Grousland's contribution was outstanding. And it speaks loudly for their desire to spread history.
Yes.
So I'm excited to work with Grousland again. I'll be making several trips down to Vincennes, I'm sure, during that 3-month period. And frankly, I can't wait till it opens up September 1st.
It'll be amazing. I can't wait.
I think so. And look, this is Grousland's first attempt at this type of thing. And if this one goes well, what I anticipate is that there will be more of it. Not of just. I'm not saying there will be more exhibits of long rifles, but think about what's going to be in there is gun makers from Indiana. But look, why not Kentucky?
Yeah.
Why not Illinois? Illinois was part of Indiana territory. And why not Wisconsin? And then why not artifacts from the War of 1812?
Right.
More artifacts. Why not powder horns? Why not swords? I mean, the opportunity for historians, for collectors, and for Grousland is, I think, great.
Yeah.
We can keep going.
Jumping into really the last couple questions I have for you. What tips would you have to share to aspiring historians and collectors? Okay, so look, I look back on the last 26 years or so, and I think, the first thing that I did is I collected books before I started collecting rifles. And I started to study. And it was that first day in Asheville, North Carolina, I went to the library and started reading books on the subject. And then I came back and found more books, including Albert Lindert's book. And I used Albert Lindert's book for many years. It was my guide. And so the first thing I think is collect books. The next thing I would say is begin a network of trusted people around you, because it's those people that have the knowledge that will share the knowledge and will help you along the way. The other thing is, I think when you're collecting, understand that collecting isn't a get rich quick endeavor. It's a very slow process, and be patient with it. Buy carefully. Buy from your trusted advisors. Ask for second or third opinions on a rifle or on something you're wanting to buy. And give those guys a call. Give the veterans a call and ask them what they think. I'd say keep priorities straight, because the collecting field can consume a person if they're not careful. And for me, it's been great having a wife that keeps me in check. So she helps me keep my priorities straight, and that's all good. I would say get your spouse involved as much as you can. Develop your spouse. Develop
his or her interest in what you want to collect, and get their buy-in before you take the leap. I would say don't be afraid of making a mistake. There's going to be times when you want to jump and times that you have to jump. Know that if you make a mistake, it's okay. And don't give up because you made a mistake. Maybe you misidentified a gun. Maybe you didn't see a repair initially, but a repair was hidden. Don't be too afraid of it. It gets better. Read about history. Read novels and not just documents. Read about the gun or the powder horn you're interested in, but don't just read about the guns and powder horns. Read about the stories behind them. So read historic novels. They help pull things together. For me, organization at home was really, really important. The ability to keep your files up to date and organize your files in such a way that you can retrieve quickly and efficiently was important for me. Submit if you're going to collect and write. And I would prompt people to write. Doesn't start out slow and submit an article to a magazine. Muzzle Blast has been wonderful. And submit your stuff to the magazines and see if you can get it published. See if you can share it. I try to give my mentors credit whenever I can. I've talked a long time tonight, and there's so many guys that helped me, I can't mention them all.
Right.
But when you're writing, those trusted advisors around you, if they've helped you, let people know that they've helped you. Let's see. Not only your mentors, but your organization. So I've mentioned the NMLRA. I've mentioned the KRA. There's another organization out here of interest that is helping with the exhibit called Beyond the Bluegrass at Grouseland. And that's the American Society of Arms Collectors.
Yeah.
And they're, look, I'm not even a member yet. And they've contributed significantly financially to the exhibit. Our Indiana Association has also contributed to the exhibit at Grouseland. And what I'm trying to say to a beginner is, look, these organizations are important to you. Don't forget about them, and give them credit where credit is due.
Yeah.
And I think that pretty much covers my advice.
I think that's some great advice. I mean, I really appreciate you sharing that. I mean, we've gone from watching Fess Parker to finding Fess Parker really in a long rifle in an antique shop to publishing your book and now participating in these exhibits. And I think if somebody's been listening this long, they can really learn from and take that advice to heart for sure.
Good deal. I hope so.
And then if somebody is, out there and they've enjoyed this conversation, they want to find out more about your work, where can people go to find that, to find some of the photographs that you've been talking about and to learn a little bit more? So
my book is a great place.
I agree.
Okay. So the book has I was kind of overwhelmed with the early demand of the book, and they sold very rapidly, much faster than I anticipated. And I didn't advertise. I didn't pay for one advertisement to promote the book. Okay, so the advertisement that really launched it came from the National Muzzleloading Rifle Association, and it came from the Kentucky Rifle Association. And those two organizations, well, the other one was the Indiana Antique Arms Association also pitched in, and they advertised it. But the way to find it now is through my website. And I have a very simple website, and it's indianagunmakers.com. And so if you go to that website, my name and phone number and my email address is listed. And if I can ship you a book, contact me and I'll get your name and address. You send me a check. And the book, by the way, is $90 a piece and $10 for shipping in the U.S. And I'll ship you a book as soon as I get your check.
And it's not paid. It's not a paid advertisement, but it is seriously one of my favorite books. I think I picked it up at the Lawrenceburg show that Mel and Frank House put together.
Yes.
I think that was the first time I was able to actually meet you in person. And I was so excited for that book because I live in Indiana. My family's been in Indiana for several generations now. And being able to connect family history and muzzleloading history to the state that you live in is really a wonderful and enjoyable thing to do. So I thank you so much. I mean, I paid for my book. This isn't a paid endorsement in any way, but thank you for making that book and for the rest of the work that you've been doing, Jeff, because it's, I'm just one guy, but it's really fueled a lot of passion in me for Indiana history and Indiana gun makers.
Good deal. That never gets old hearing. That's for sure.
Good.
And look, I'm really glad you brought up Mel's show because Mel's shows was my biggest show. And 60 books. I came home with 60 books less after that show. Wow. And in fact, in the middle of the show, I had to go back home and resupply my books for the next day. and Mel gave me a front table at that show, so everybody walking through the door saw my table with the book on it and with some Indiana rifles display, including you. So I'm glad you brought it up.
I'm happy to.
It's been good talking to you. And again, thank you for doing what you do.
Well, I really appreciate that. It's, you know, I really feel, and I've really experienced a lot of the same community aspects that you talked about, and I'm really glad to continue to get that message out. I think something I hear quite a bit is people think that muzzleloading is standoffish or it's difficult, or you know, people are going to make you feel dumb if you don't know what it is. But I think the more we can share stories like that, the more engaging that we can make things. And that was just really great to hear from you.
Well, thank you very much. Very much appreciated.
I'd like to thank Jeff again for taking time out of his day to chat with me and really chat with all of you at home about this, you know, and his passion for muzzleloading. I think coming away from this episode, having just hung up on our call here with Jeff, really the passion that Jeff has for muzzleloading and for history really shines through, to me at least, after this conversation. You know, there were a lot of twists and turns, but it was really nice to hear a story from somebody like Jeff who was interested in muzzleloading, kind of watching Fess Parker here, but didn't really get into the community until he was a young adult there at the age of 33. I think that's just really encouraging for me to hear, and I hope it's encouraging for you out there. It doesn't matter when you get into muzzleloading. What matters is that you enjoy it. and that you participate and that you have fun. That's really what it's all about, I think. And in that having fun, like we heard from Jeff, we have so much opportunity to preserve history and carry it on for another generation and learn a lot. That's something I find myself coming away from conversations like this with Jeff is, I kind of live, eat, and breathe muzzleloading, it feels like, most days, but I still come away from conversations like this having learned something new. It's the kind of thing I really enjoy, and I hope that you have as well. As always, we'll have links to a bunch of the things discussed in this episode in the show notes to go along with this episode. We'll also have a blog post at ilovemuzzleloading.com with some photos and some videos of Jeff's work for you to check out, as well as the links to things like Beyond the Bluegrass, Jeff's book, and some of the other collectors and their works that have helped Jeff along his own journey. Because I think Jeff put it really well here in this episode. There's a community here of people. They give to you and you give back in due time. And I think that is just a really fantastic way to put and to describe the muzzleloading community. I don't care what your interest is, if you're a historian and a collector like Jeff, or if you're out there mucking through the woods in your moccasins with your flintlock. That community is still there, and they all share very similar values. And if nothing else, they share a passion for seeing this carried forward. As we look to summer of 2023 here, I'm excited about one, Beyond the Bluegrass at Grouseland down there in Vincennes starting in September. But before that, I should be attending the Gunmakers Fair at Kempton again for its second year. It's a long drive for me. It's about 12 hours to get out there, but I really enjoyed my time in Pennsylvania at the first year for the Gunmakers Fair at Kempton. If you're on the fence about this event, please try to make it out if you can. They're growing, I think, considerably compared to last year, and I'm really excited what the future holds for this event. It's not a paid sponsorship or anything. That's just really how I feel about it, and I'm really counting down the days till the end of July where we can make it out. Then coming up in August, we have the CLA show, and then in September we have Beyond the Bluegrass, as well as the NMLRA September National Championship shoot. Lot of muzzleloading going on. As always, if you have a muzzleloading event that you put on or that you enjoy or that you just see being promoted, please send me the flyer, send me some information about it. I put up as many flyers as I can find at ilovemuzzleloading.com for events, for clubs, for free. There's no charge to it. It's free promotion to reach quite a few muzzleloading enthusiasts out there online. So please shoot me an email at ilovemuzzleloading@gmail.com, and I'll get your flyer posted, usually within the week, to start reaching some more folks. Once again, I'm Ethan. I love muzzleloading. Thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you next time.